Hey everyone, Sam is facilitating today, so we'll just wait for him to come on here. Thanks for your patience.
Is anybody else seeing captions? Or is that just me?
I see that someone has enabled them.
Okay. I was like, what's happening here?
Yeah, you should be able to, there's a button on the lower part of your screen that says show captions with like a little CC box. You should be able to turn that on and off.
Thanks. We use Teams at work, so I'm not as familiar with Zoom stuff.
So while we're waiting, Ginger, just really appreciate the pulling together of the document that you've done, and because I think that's all really good organization, kind of from the chaos we were in, and your proposed resolution is also, I think, right on target. So anyway, I wanted to thank you for that.
No, I appreciate that. I saw Paul's email come through and I was like, hey, that's a great idea. So, but we'll see where we end up.
Sure. Well, if there were other actors behind the scenes that I haven't really looked at this document too much, I thank them as well, because it's good work.
Mark, how are you feeling today? Any better?
So as they say in some circles, I'm on the right side of the grass. I'm feeling a little bit better, but as you know, Ginger, it ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
You went through it too. So
I think it's just the fatigue that kicks in too, that is so it just wipes you out. I mean, I was sleeping for like 3 hours a day in the middle of the day. So
yeah, and then like last night I couldn't sleep at all.
Right.
Yeah. So I got up this morning and was working at 5 in the morning and then went to take a nap around 7 and I couldn't sleep. And it's like, okay, I got to get this back under some cycle.
Yeah.
But part of it is for me, I can't exercise. And if I can't exercise, I don't sleep very well. So, but anyhow, yeah, I'm hopeful. What day am I on here now? About 5. So everyone that I talk to says this is about the time in which things can turn around. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I started feeling better on day 5 and was feeling probably 80% by day 7. So I think there is a big improvement in that 5 to 7 day window.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Thanks for asking.
All right. Good morning, everyone. It is February 10th at 9:04. This is kind of a special meeting of the Longevity Subcommittee meeting, the second of this week. Thank you all, as I mentioned in my memo, for all the additional refinements. And I did what I could to read and study all that information. I put forth a memorandum as to what's going on from my perspective, so we don't have to spend meeting time laying that out. I'm proposing that I'll start with any questions or comments surrounding the first 2 pages, and then I'm suggesting that we dive in at the 9th item is here's a process likely to get us to a draft that we can deal with, and then walk through the information that way. So with regard to items 1 through 8, did anyone have any questions, comments, contrary, different views, better suggestions? Let's take it away on items 1 through 8 of the memo.
That was my question. I wasn't sure if we were looking at the document or the memo that you sent, Sam.
We are looking at the memo I sent out last night at whatever
Okay.
o'clock.
All right.
All right, so getting to an action plan, item 9, bottom of page 1. Here's what I think the document needs before we can dive into this portion of it. I think that we have findings and recommendations throughout the document. I understand why that's the case. I think it is an impossible reconciliation task to have different findings and different recommendations in various parts of the document. So I'm going to be asking Daniel to take what was sent out last night and organize all of the findings and all of the recommendations and group them by topic. So all the findings that deal with X, whatever X topic is, should be in one place. And then if there are alternative versions of what finding X should look like, it is, as I said in the example, it's finding X and then and just a topic. It involves legislation, because I'm using that only because that's the one I had time to review last night. And then you have finding A, finding B, or finding C, meaning the 3 alternatives that one could put under that related finding. And then we have, it's easier to look at where the potential for agreement is and how we can get there. And I don't suggest we jump into those now in this call, because we haven't finished the body. We haven't got a consensus on the body of things, and therefore it would be an exercise in futility to start arguing over finding X version A, B, or C. So is there any opposition to that approach to, and this is simply a organizing exercise. It is not a picking exercise. And we can also defer the issue of, what order they should be in to once we agree on what they are. Any opposition to that approach? This is 9A of the game plan for moving forward. All right, hearing and seeing none, let's go on to the next challenge that I see. Am I correct that we have at least 2 what has been called base scenarios? Is there a
Yes.
is there a
Yes and no. Yes and no.
Well, tell me what you think the answer, what is the detail that I'm missing?
So the base scenarios in both graphics are the same. I believe in the second one, Ken added in the text below the chart, like below where it says scenario A, scenario B, or however they're labeled, some assumptions. And so what I had proposed was using the top chart, but then listing the assumptions below it, because I think the assumptions are valid. I just was trying to break it up like readability. So I think it's the same chart, it's the same scenario. There's just some additional context that Ken added. Ken, feel free to jump in if I mischaracterize that.
And
No,
just to clarify, go for it, Ken.
Ken.
Sorry, that I think that's exactly right. We've just kind of accrued these various versions because they've stacked up rather than being discussed and updating themselves. And I think Chuck added another version which was just the same information, but put in text form so we could edit it directly. The problem was that it was a graphic. So in order to edit it, you had to really, you had to actually change the graphic.
All right, so I'm suggesting again, this is just, I promise to get you, Brian. Just mechanically, so we don't lose our train of thought. I am suggesting, Daniel, that you have them clearly put forward. So if it is true that Ken and it's not really Ginger's, it's the subcommittee's version that has been working on. Apparently that graphic is acceptable. Let's put one graphic in there, and then if there and then add Ken's verbiage clearly there, and then put Chuck's on there, because apparently that requires changing some of the words in the text, and have that all in one place, as clean and concise as possible. Brian.
I just want to clarify that we're talking about the image on page 9 of what was sent out last night.
Daniel.
I'm just pulling it up. I think so, but let me double check here.
I think we're talking about the image which is on my page 5. The scenario 1, scenario 2 image.
Well, and there was one before then too. I don't know what page it's on. I mean, there's one that you guys have been working on from the jump that Paul was driving, as I understand.
Yeah, it's basically the same graphic on page 5 and 9.
Okay, so all I'm suggesting is there's a difference between the same and basically the same. So if they are the same, let's have one of them. And then if there needs to be edits to it, we can lay them out as decision points. Like it would be, should we change the x-axis to state ... versus ... d. And so it's framed up clearly as questions for the subcommittee, so we can get right to the issue and not have to explain, well, here's the difference between X and Y. I mean, these two versions, let's frame them up for actual decision points. Ken, and then Daniel. You're on mute, buddy.
I think what Ginger was indicating, the one on page 9 should be deleted. There's the little graphic edit thing underneath it also. We are just going to go with the one on page 5. The assumptions that are in the one on page 9 are what Ginger was talking about, the assumptions that have been incorporated into the body text. So I think this is all resolved.
Ginger, is that accurate from your perspective? Okay,
Yep.
so Daniel, that's your marching orders, unless you have a different point of view on that.
Did Brian or Dan, it looked like a couple of hands were up, so I wanted to make sure there were no additional questions before. And then I
no.
just move forward.
Okay,
Nope,
so
I just wanted to make sure I was talking about the same one.
Yeah. So related to this, because this is going, Chuck, are you plotting for the decision or raising your hand? And you're on mute, buddy. I'm sorry.
I just want to make one comment. I like Ginger's point in readability, and then readability dictates what you were saying, where you have a graph up above and then text below and further text below. So that's what I look at when I, first reading through it is the storyline is you start there and it makes sense following down, so it doesn't stop you and you're going, where'd that come from, and have to go back up. So I know that's a trick that I can't perform. That's above my pay grade.
Great. Well, the other issue as to this, I'm going to raise that because it floats into the more controversial areas of part 3 or whatever it is called, is I did not have time to study all of the words and logic there. But what I am driving for is common understandings based on likely scenarios, not possible scenarios. And this applies to the baseline condition as well. What did not jump off the page for me in the moment is a clear statement of what, how likely, read here, and I would prefer probable, not possible, are those baseline scenarios going to happen? Because we need to use the same standard of likelihood for the base condition as we do for any other conditions or factors that we're can. This is Ken's extremely valid point that what's good for, well, he didn't say it this way, but what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So if we're gonna use, if we're only using possibilities, then possibilities are for everything. If we're only using probabilities, the question becomes, do we have the expertise to give probabilities? But it's not clear to me, at least as of last night, under the gun, like all of you have been, to know what's the likelihood this base scenario is going to happen. Because I do think the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners, and this came up in the assessment, want to know, when is this going to close? When is it likely to close? So tell me, those of you who are close to this, just focusing on the baseline scenario now that we have, what is the intent you're trying to convey with, here's this information. It is possible this could be the scenario. It is likely to be the scenario. It's more probable, more likely than not. It's going to be, and why? Whatever gradation on that so-called probabilistic curve you are, why is that likely to be the scenario? So there's a lot there, so just take it away.
Well, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Ian.
Oh, go ahead, Chuck. You were first.
Oh, okay, thank you. Just slid under you there at second base. Sorry about that. There's 3 topics, if you will: capacity, size, and longevity. And if you look at, if you just say longevity is based on the current approved cells, which is 6 fundamentally, I look at it as 2 different things. That's the cell life. But longevity, there's a correlation in longevity between cell life and what I would call a disposable land reserve. I mean, that's fundamentally what it is over there, land reserve. And land reserve is based on being able to develop more cell life. But reciprocally speaking there, and it's not a probability, reciprocally there, if you have X amount of land reserve, you use that land reserve for more cells, but that diminishes the overall life of the disposal site because you're reducing your disposable land. So that's a realistic. It's just a matter of, it doesn't matter if you have 1,000 acres, 1 acre. Once you convert your land reserve, that reduces the overall future capability of development there. So there's a good correlation there. It's not probability, it's fact, but the question is how much land reserve can be changed to landfill? That's the
Okay.
question. That's the question. I'll end it there.
So, you know, I love you more than life itself. And here is, I think, the problem this subcommittee, one of the problems this subcommittee is facing. Everyone who's been on these calls for X number of months is totally steeped in all of these nuances. There is, I believe, a natural tendency to believe the reader comes to that section with the same underlying understandings and nuances. I think that our target audience is the Board of Commissioners, the Planning Commission, and the public, who has not been in these discussions. When they ask, when is the landfill likely to close? They first want to hear a year or range of years. And then most of them, frankly, will stop their need for additional information at that point, especially if the subcommittee has agreed that the year is X or the range of years is X plus 2. That is how this section, even the baseline, needs to be written at the 100-page report level. The justification for why it's X or X plus 2 can go into the appendix. But I'm trying to keep us at the level that we answer, give them the information in a way that they actually can use the way they want to do it. And so all those explanations, I get, they're important, but they're not, it's not, the message will not get conveyed because that's not what they're asking for. Ian.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, I'm the one that put together this with Bill's help. But again, it's the technical details that you were referring to, you didn't want to get into, but it's based off of the most recent data we have and most recent measurements, and that's how we came up with these. Should we add a plus or minus a little more to account for unknowns? Possibly, but again, that's really probably more for experts on some of the other possible impacts or factors that we're not looking at in great detail. So I don't know how to give you more. I'd say it was more likely than not to be in this range, but I'm not quite sure how to get it any more precise.
Right. Okay. So I'm sorry, I'm driving this point because I think it is key to unlocking the logjam we are in. I think the reader needs a narrative, and it may be there, and it just got washed out in the various versions and what else I had to do last night. I think the typical reader, our target audience, let's use that term, target audience wants a narrative that says, we have had, here is the historical tonnage that has come in. Here is the historic, it's not compaction, what do you call it? What's the word?
Density.
Yeah, here is our historic density. If you assume those are going to stay the same and the cap stays in place, this is the likely end date or dates because of A, B, and C. They need to understand it at that cocktail party level of understanding. Is that a guarantee that that's what's going to happen? Of course not. But it has to be that simple. So the order I saw people was Daniel, Ginger, Brian.
I'm going to make comments on some of the factors that we go into, so I'm going to hold off until we get there.
Okay, Ginger.
So I believe we have what you are asking for. If you look at the bottom of page 5 and the top of page 6 on the document that Daniel sent out. Because what I did last night is I put in language that says, we arrived at these baseline scenarios, which we basically agreed on early on, because they are industry accepted modeling for estimating a landfill's life. Then I said, the baseline scenarios are built on certain assumptions, because that was part of Ken's text. And so we clearly list what those assumptions are, and they are projected tonnage based on recent history. The tonnage cap is in there, the airspace that's consumed, the density, and the site life. And so I feel like those, I mean, it's less than half a page of text immediately below the graphic explains exactly what you're talking about. Now, if other subcommittee members disagree or want to change that, that's fine. But I think that's what we were trying to convey very clearly to the commissioners and anybody else. These are the baselines. These are the assumptions that went into the baselines. So
Okay,
with
so
that, I'll open it up to everybody else.
Okay, before you do though, I want to tee up the discussion question, and that is there an emerging agreement that section that Ginger just summarized is workable enough that we copy it from page whatever you just said, 5 and 6, and moved it up to the place it belongs in this baseline scenario place? I'm not saying that you agree with it. I said, is it close enough that it's a reasonable section to move up and get rid of conflicting sections to?
Right
So
now, it's below the graphic. It's immediately below the graphic we're talking about.
Okay, so is anyone objecting to the placement of that there? So I'm hearing none. So we're good to go on that. Again, I'm driving towards getting as much fidelity on this document as we can to have the real conversation. So the order is Brian, then Chuck.
So I guess I was just going to go back on clarity on the table again. It's just say that from a customer standpoint, Marion County being a customer of Coppin Butte, this table really sums it up for me, and what my commissioners wanted is they're just to what Sam said, they're looking for a date that says kind of, I don't know if you say worst case, best case scenario, if they're at the tonnage cap, we've got about 15 years. That's basically what they wanted to know. And yeah, there's a bunch of things that may change or impact that, but that's that snapshot in time, because that's all this is, right? It's a snapshot, best guess today of what it's going to be. So,
Chuck.
Yes, I agree with Brian and Ginger. Is the analysis, if you will, on longevity is 15 years. And basically it's based on today's disposal, density, and capacity. So it's right there. And then a multitude of scenarios can unfold underneath that if needed.
Okay. All right. Good. We're making good progress here. All right. Next, I'm on page 2. It's 9C, and I think this is the crux of the transition and where the major blockage exists. And really, it comes down to this: are we asking questions or providing answers with these factors? So everyone agrees that we should tee up these additional factors that have varying degrees of probability to impact the baseline condition. And everyone agrees that we should tee that up. The big difference I see in reading these various versions comes down to the threshold issue. Are we asking the questions or are we providing the answers? And I, laid out all the reasons why. And I focus you in on your draft recommendation, which is laid out in E. The SMMP should further develop scenarios and factors that may impact the landfill lifespan, including detailed analysis of likely, that's why I've been using that word, likely projections. Okay. There seems to be two base emerging agreements that we should tee up these factors and we should give them to the SMMP consultant for quote unquote detailed analysis and likely projections. Do we agree to, just as far as I said, do we agree to those two propositions? Daniel, are you agreeing or you are your thumbs up, you agree? Brian agrees. First we'll get agreement, then I'm going to call on you, Ken. Who agree? I want to hear from everybody with a thumbs up or thumbs down, just to take the pulse of the room, and then we'll have the discussion. Okay.
Sam, can you repeat it one more time so I can be clear on what you're suggesting, please?
Okay.
And I would also like if you could clarify where you're looking at in the document.
So it's my memo, not
your
the
memo.
document. It's
Okay.
my memo. Item E is a quote from someplace in the document. Maybe Daniel can find it while we're doing, but I literally copied and pasted it. You have a draft recommendation that says, quote, the SMMP should further develop scenarios and factors that may impact the landfill lifespan, including detailed analysis of likely projections, emphasis added. So that was literally a copy and paste for somewhere in the body of the report.
Page
All right.
11.
Page 11. Okay, Mark, page 11. So what I am suggesting is you have an emerging agreement as a subcommittee that just putting what we have in the baseline is not enough, that we should, at a minimum, ask the questions surrounding the other scenario or other factors that could influence longevity of the plan. Where the departure is do we simply ask them or are we answering them? I believe the current versions do more answering than they do asking. And I think that's where you all are struggling, is with the answers to them. Ken, take it away.
Yeah, well, we talked about, for cases like Brian's, and for a number of people, what they want to do, like Brian said, what they want is they want a date. They know it's fuzzy, but it gives them a general idea about what's happening. But of course, when you're talking about like the Board of Commissioners or, bodies like that, they also want to know some context around this particular projection. And so we've laid out some of those, and we've laid out the assumptions that underlie that particular thing. But we also know more about, we know something about the environment in which this number lies. And so Sam put it perfectly. I mean, he was talking about, well, a range of numbers. And I don't think there are very many people who would approach this and expect that we know, to the year when the landfill is going to close. I think people are expecting a range. because they understand the factors which are going in. And so the question is, what is the earliest likely time? What is kind of the latest likely time? Is there likely to be more time or less? And also, what are the possibilities? Things which aren't necessarily likely, but which are consequential. All of those things are part of future thinking as I've experienced them. And so that is the approach I think that we've taken on. So when people look at that number and then they say they have further questions, I think that's what us identifying, events and factors is. We're not answering a question, with that in terms of deriving a precise answer. And we did this in the committee. We came up with a list of these factors. So, I'm not seeing exactly why we're now I think we're all agreed that there should be a list of those factors because we know what they are. I don't know why we would withhold that information that we've had, or strike it at this point in time. And so, the struggle seems to be, how do we depict those factors? And certainly I am aware that there may be people that say this is too speculative for me. That's a perfectly valid argument, right? And that's a discussion that we can have. But we want to have that list somehow. I think we're all agreed that the late in a bit there's the graphic. I think Ginger and Chuck came up with. I'm not sure. Which has positive, negative influences. I mean, I think that is indeed because of course the next question that people have, if you identify, a factor, is they go, well, which way is this going to affect the life of the landfill? Is it going to shorten it, or is it going to extend it? Is it likely to? Is it possible to? I mean, language like that, we're not saying that it's going to happen. So, I don't agree that people are looking for a particular number, that our audience is totally looking for that. I think realistically they know that there's a range, and they would like to know how they can actually look at that range and say, I need to plan because it might be sooner, or these are the factors that would make it actually be later. I mean, either of those. Because the projection is quite clearly running at the cap. And so it's kind of an optimistic projection from Republic's point of view. They don't factor in things that can, kind of impede that progress, because they don't need to for their projection. But realistically, other people, people in the county or whatever, they do want to factor that in. So I'm sorry, I've kind of gone on and on, but I'm just trying to kind of get us back to where we were.
Other thoughts? Chuck, then Brian.
Thank you. The question or the answer, or answering a question. What I like about some of the questions and then the answers, it puts a perspective there, and different perspectives for just educational purposes, if you will, knowing what a landfill is, landfill alternatives, and that then plays into, if you will, the sustainable materials management plan. But the essence, there is a correlation between solid waste management and sustainable materials. Sustainable materials is not replacing everything in solid waste management. There's a correlation. They both stand at the end of the day. So what I'm trying to say is queuing up some questions that will assist the solid waste management, as well as identify what solid waste management still is, because it's in a transitional period to transfer from one to the other. The other, just like the other doesn't fall, just like recycling took time to transition, but we still have solid waste. They go hand in hand. That's all I'm trying to say with the question and answers.
Okay, where do you see the question in these in this document? I see a bunch of possible answers. I am not seeing the question.
Well, what I would say is basically just what I'm saying, the question is in with if it is in the subcommittee's general charge is size, capacity, longevity. But some of the questions transition or feed into the other committees. And that's what I was saying the other night is Daniel, as the clearinghouse and the facilitator, if you will, it is not one committee stands together, everything some intertwines with each other. So some of the questions give perspective, the path to the other ones is what I'm trying to say.
So here's the nuance I need to drive us for, and that I think is key to unlocking this. Dana, can you pull up my memo to share on the screen with people on page 2? Well, excuse me, page 3, I lied. So let's just stop right there. So I just, again, like I said, I didn't have time to do all of these. I just picked one example and I put Daniel's and Ken's approach. To me, if it is accurate that we want to ask questions, then this document says legislation impacting landfill operations. We are making it should read to what is the likely probability that future legislation surrounding landfill operations will impact the life of Coffin Butte. That is a question. And then if you, these are what we believe the expert should, should discuss. Will it, let's see, how important is the amount of waste they accept? Well, clearly very important. What happens if demand goes this way, that way, what have you? Go down, please, a little further to number 2. This is where I'm getting hung up. Ken then says, with many of the items in this format, I would say impart zero useful information to the reader. Is there any such legislation pending? Has there been any in the past? How significant was it? Will it be? That's exactly the point I am getting at. Those are the questions that we need to ask. But what happens after that are answers based on what we believe is possible, which cuts to the chase. Is the board looking for possibility or likelihood? A serious meaning probability, more likely than not. So I'll pause there to clarify with an example of where the tension is. Brian, and you can close the screen. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wanting to go back to even the comment of back to the questions. I know the SMMP committee is really phrasing things in that manner of we're not trying to answer the question, but we have questions that we want answered by the consultant or whoever's writing that paper. That I don't disagree that a lot of these factors can be factors, but the problem is we get into the whole disagree and agree. Right now, I know there's legislation that could negatively impact the capacity at Coffin Butte that is only legislatively geared at Marion County right now. But that could force me to need the place to put another 125,000 tons. So it's not necessarily a positive impact, but it's something that people aren't aware of. So I think going to more of the generic, are there legislative things that would be answered within the SMMP or whatever, so that we're not trying to hash all those options, because there are more. I mean, and even with what we have listed, there's different factors that we're unaware of, or we may even be aware of, that we're not going to have time or the space to explain. So I think we should just go to more of a generic question that could impact capacity, whether it's either way.
Other thoughts?
I think Brian hit the nail on the head. There is just to get it in some context there, so the reader. We're in a transition right now, and I think Brian said is just get the summary on the marquee, if you will.
Ken, I promised to call on you, but I first want to give an opportunity to hear everyone else. So Paul, Ian, Mark, Ginger. Go ahead, Paul.
All right. First of all, Sam, if I understand the question, the decision, thumbs up, thumbs down, you're trying to get to, it's basically, do we simply want to list with maybe very brief commentary all the factors that we think might conceivably or perhaps, possibly likely impact landfill life? Or do we want to make any attempt to flesh out some of those possible scenarios? Is that a correct understanding?
I think, yes, there's a lot of important nuances, and I'm not asking to call the question now. I'm just teeing it up for future conversation. But yeah.
Okay, then in that case, it seems like what we would be saying as a committee is, and if you'll remember back in November, I'm the guy who said the franchisee needs to be responsible for generating kind of the baseline scenarios because they are the subject matter experts, and they have done that. And so they've got their data in, and Ginger has now added some color to that, which is really helpful. But it sounds like what we are proposing as a path is to document the baseline scenarios, of which there are two, 1.1 and 1 million tons a year, and then list some things that might affect that projection, the EOL projection that's derived from that, but not say anything at all really about examples of how these might affect, the degree to which they might affect. And so in that case, we're really just putting forth the franchisee's baseline EOL estimate and kind of listing a cloud of factors that might impact it. And if that's what you're comfortable feeling, in terms of us meeting our responsibilities for estimating landfill life, then that's one thing. I would say as an engineer, you tend to try to at least flesh out some possible deviation scenarios from the nominal case to give the reader an idea of what might happen here. And I'll say one other thing and then turn it over to who's next, is part of the reason this is so sensitive for those of us who live here is the projections that we have received for expected closure dates of the landfill have often been way off base. And so time and time again, it's sort of been, a shell game in trying to track that down. And I'm not faulting the franchisee at all for that. This is not a recent occurrence. This happened way before Allied Waste bought out Valley Landfills, and it happened way before Republic bought out Allied Waste. It's been a recurring problem, and I feel that we owe our commissioners some degree of information here about what the bracket might be.
The cat did not raise its hand to get in the queue.
Here, kitty, kitty.
That's it.
All right. Brian, you've also spoken. I want to give everyone else who hasn't spoken. So I believe them on this narrow topic. So that's Mark, Bill, Ian, Ginger. Whoever's the best looking and most intelligent person, just unmute yourself and speak.
Okay, I will. What, you knew that was coming, right, Sam?
I was gonna beat you to the punch, but if you want to have a competition about it, that's fine.
No, I will try my best to be very brief. And Paul, I appreciate your comments there. And if I was interpreting them right, it sounded like some inconsistency was really taking place prior Allied Waste, if I heard that right. And I fully understand the impact to the life and the moving target it has had just since my involvement with the site, which takes me back to January 2012. And so, you know, I mean, is the intent here? And as I was listening to you, Paul, I you know, was trying to envision how that would be conveyed to the reader. And as the current franchisee, yeah, I felt that it would be misconstrued and probably inadvertently or unintentionally directed towards us. And we have been, from my perspective, as accurate as we can be with respect to tonnages that have gone in and factors that have impacted the life of the landfill. So I know this is just a general comment, but I just want us to be mindful of, you know, how that is posed, if I may. And by all means, we understand there's factors that have happened in just the last handful of years that have impacted the life of the site, whether it's positive or negative. And yes, I think we all understand on this call that it's very hard to predict those. We could not have predicted the wildfire that occurred just a few years ago, and that was very significant. And so we as the franchisee do our best to try to stay as fluid as we possibly can to be able to navigate and mitigate for those impacts. And I guess I am of favor of a more generalized approach, understanding the uncertainties that surround those. But since Sam did ask for some input, and I just wanted to share that.
Thanks. Who's next? Ginger?
I have some thoughts, but I think whether I need to share them will probably be determined by what Ken and Brian have to say. I know they have had their hands up for a while. So I'd like them to be able to put their hands down, their virtual hands down, and go first.
Okay, Ken, you were first between Ken and Brian.
Yeah, thanks. So I just want to point out, like on the page that you showed us, Sam, from your document, so page 3. So I mean, this is content from Daniel, but it has things that I found out. And so example, you know, in its 2021 methane emissions reduction plan, the US government is mobilizing all available tools to identify and reduce methane emissions from all major sources, you know, et cetera. And it goes on to also talk about the 2023 Food Donation Improvement Act. So both of those have ramifications, you know, for landfills. Both of those are existing. That's, you know, it's already a done deal. So, you know, so what am I trying to say? So it just seems remiss to me, you know, for us to have this information in front of us and now say, well, that's not relevant, you know, to the audience we've got, because the audience that we have, you know, one of the questions they may be asking is, well, what about the environmental legislation, which I've read about in the papers, is that going to have an effect upon the landfill? You know, what could that effect be if indeed, you know, when these things come to pass? You know, especially the food donation one. I mean, that's a big one, essentially, you know, in terms of methane production, and also, you know, what, 1/3 of the food in Oregon goes into landfills. So, you know, only 2/3 of it gets eaten. You know, this act is going to improve that. So, you know, certainly I can, I agree with the notion of basing things in kind of what is likely to happen. And I also agree with basing things with questions that our audience is going to have. And it seems to me that that is a question, one, that's information that they would like to have, and two, that's a question that they would like to know about. And we don't have to say how likely it is, or, you know, we don't want to go beyond what we know, but we can say there is a 2021 methane emissions reduction plan. There is a 2023 food donation improvement act. And this is what the effect would be, up or down, of those particular items. So if we're talking about something like a list of essentially these sorts of relevant factors with an up or down, you know, that certainly is something that we could do, and it can be derived from the material that we have.
So let me be very, very clear as to my nuanced comment here. I'm framing up as a beginning part of the discussion. Do we ask questions, or do we provide answers, or do we do both? Here's the question, and here's the answer. Okay. I have problems with Daniel's version as well. Okay. For the very reason that it is not a question. They are statements of some of the possible factors that could come under the broad category of legislation. Here's, as I've said previously, again, just so I'm trying to frame the issue. And yes, I do have a point of view based on you know, what I understand the commissioners to want. If you go, Dan, if you could pull up my document again and go to page 5. And it's item 4. So let's see, stop. So it's this paragraph is just above 5. This scenario presents a national initiative to designed to impact the landfill's entire watershed. A representation of its effect is shown in 3C7. So let me just parse that statement. It is a representation of a possible effect for one factor. And now let's go to the actual figure. This is what I said before, is where I think it has the potential. Now, I'm not saying that there's an intent. It has the potential for people to believe that that chart, in fact, is the likely effect of legislation. We do not know that for the reasons said above. So we don't even know how it's going to affect. So Dan, are you when you have time, can you go to that figure 3C7? And if you could blow it up a little bit. Okay. Represents national incentives to divert organic waste from being landfilled, generating greenhouse gases, plus penalties on landfills or methane gases. Is this scenario possible? Yeah. But is it probable or likely, or is it presented by people who are external to this process, who for reasons right, wrong, or indifferent on the given the political nature of this, are going to be believable and without bias in providing the information. That's where these charts that say they convey the images that we know the effect of climate crisis legislation. The best we can say is this is one possible scenario. So that's the narrow point I am making. And that I'm suggesting to you may be a step too far. Okay, Brian, then Daniel.
So I want to go back and maybe clarify my statements just for Ken too, that I don't think that should be excluded, in the sense that I think that there should be the question that says something along the lines of what impacts do the Inflationary Reduction Act of 2022 have on capacity. I think those statements should still be in there, but just not the answers to go with them. So I think they need to be in there because, like you said, they do exist and they are there. And then Paul, and again, I just want to clarify, being in government and trying to put the best information out that I possibly can in projecting tons or capacity or everything else, you're doing your best at that snapshot, because that's all it is a snapshot in time. If we armchair quarterback and go back, we as those officials putting that information are always wrong because there's something we didn't assume, there's something we missed, natural disasters, whatever changes that. So if we continue to look back and say the franchisee's horrible at doing this, because you're right, that's kind of that perspective. The problem is we can only kind of look at today and look forward. I mean, I'm in the middle of budgeting once again. I think I had this conversation with the subcommittee, is I'm trying to do projections on tonnage. COVID had impacts that were negative in generation in a lot of communities in Oregon. In Marion County, our tonnage went up. It went through the roof. My transfer stations were inundated. I was projecting declines. I projected declines literally for 3 years straight, and I have nothing but double-digit increases. So our intentions are good. Our intentions are positive to try to do those things, but looking back, you're going to see something completely different from that intent. And I just want to caution when we do that. And then the other part of that in the document is we get further away from the local jurisdiction, meaning Benton County, information provided to Benton County, to DEQ, to EPA, to whoever. The further away you get from the exact jurisdiction, the worse that information is. So if we try to grab EPA information, it's just further from, in a sense, that truth that I think we're looking for, just to be cautious. So,
Daniel.
Thank you, and thanks, Brian. I pretty much am following up with to Brian's point, and I largely agree with all of that. And the COVID example is a good one, where, you know, in a lot of the work I've done on this document is trying to highlight that we don't know. You know, almost all of these factors we really cannot say with any likelihood over another option of whether or not it will increase or decrease lifespan. I think we can spell out, you know, the examples and legislation that is pending and ask the question of what it could do. But I don't think we're at a point where we can spell it out with any fairness to the reader. My more kind of zoomed out point in this document, and something I think we're missing largely in this section when we're talking about factors, is we seem to be expressing that, you know, a factor will impact the landfill lifespan almost in a vacuum, and not in the sense that they relate to one another factor wise. I think we've spelled that out pretty well, and Ginger's new version points that out well, is that they might react to one another or relate. I think the vacuum that I'm talking about is, I think wildfires is a good example. If we say that wildfires will decrease the lifespan of the landfill, the reader gets the sense that, oh wow, a wildfire means wildfire debris are coming into the landfill. No questions asked. That's how it works. The context of all of that is that the landfill operator accepts materials. So we have to go as far as assuming that not only will that factor impacts demand in a certain way, but then also that the landfill operator will accept those materials. And I think we get so far down the line, it makes it really tough. And I think putting things into the context of how it's working at the landfill scale is really helpful. I also think having information from the landfill operator on what they would do in the situation, because ultimately it comes down to what they will accept. I think that's really helpful. But for folks that are outside of that sphere of decision making, is really tough, and I think implies to the reader that we know more than we do.
So Ginger had her hand up first, but I like Paul better. So go ahead, Paul, take it away. You're on mute, buddy.
Sorry. Just one comment to try to leap ahead here. It sounds like the path, Sam, you're kind of directing or encouraging, and Brian even seems to agree with, and I certainly understand Republic's perspective in terms of not wanting to get involved in prognostications. If we go down the path of simply presenting the baseline scenarios and then listing the factors that might impact them, I think we owe our readers to the ability that we can generate such a number and some guidance on what the lower bound, the shorter lifetime might be. And the reason I say that is I think part of the purpose of our work and our document here is to give governmental entities, Brian, you guys, and Benton County, an idea of how much runway they have before something happens. You know, the dump is full, you know, the landfill needs to expand, whatever. And so if we simply put the baseline scenario out there without any guidance at all on how that might significantly be shortened, and I know we can't be specific about that because it's speculative, but I would just encourage people to think, you know, Bill and Ginger and all you guys, I'm just like you to consider if there's anything we could say in this report about how much shorter that time might be, because I think that's an important point for our intended audience here. Thank you.
So again, let me respond to that as clearly as I can, so we don't have a flyby here. I believe we do owe a duty to the entire Benton County community to say what we can about the short, the short scenario, call it, as possible. The distinction is how we frame that up. I am suggesting it's more intellectually honest to say, here's what we assume to be things that could influence it. There are arguments under the realm of possibility, shorten, lengthen, and everywhere in between as individual factors. But the reality is each of those individual factors are not the only ones that are going to happen. There are going to be, and I'm making this up, 15 factors, up, down, and sideways, that go into, is it likely to be shorter or longer? And so, Dan, if you, again, go back to this painful memo, page 5, number 6. This is how I think mechanically, Paul, we thread the needle and create that balanced information. I'll just let you read 6A, B, and C, so you don't have to hear my melodious voice, mellow as the month of May, as it gets hoarser and hoarser. that's what is done in modeling exercises to arrive at the information that everyone is entitled to know. It is not simply listing possibilities. A. B, as a practical matter, it will take divine intervention to get the various points of views on this subcommittee reconciled anyway as to all of these factors. It's not going to happen. We don't have the time. We don't have the expertise. This is modeling exercises apply probable facts to scenarios. It is more of a data-driven exercise than a futures or visioning exercise. That's what the SMMP is about. So that's how I'm suggesting we can thread the needle here. Does that, so it includes asking questions to what extent, if well, asking these questions for each of the things like the legislation that we know about, what have you, but taking it a step beyond that is outside of our true fund of knowledge. So Ginger, then Ken.
So my immediate reaction is I'm fine with that approach. I'm fine with teeing things up as a question. I think that as much as our job is to provide a clear, readable document for people who follow in Benton County commissioners, another key part of what we need to be doing here is achieving consensus. And to that end, I think that from what I'm gathering from Paul and certainly, you know, previously from Ken and from Mark, they really want, let me, if I'm mischaracterizing this, tell me, they really believe that there is some critical thought that can go into this process. And so to that end, I respectfully would request that the subcommittee consider some of the text that I provided in my document that I sent over, and it's on page, it's on page 5 and 6, I think, because I did pull that directly from things that Ken had written, things that Paul had written, things that Chuck had written. And it does try to explain that, you know, how we arrived at a positive factor, how we arrived as a negative factor, what the assumptions, you know, why we got to assumptions and scenarios. I think Ken is exactly right. We can't ignore the human factor that ultimately has influence on landfill tonnage. And so what I'm wondering is can we agree to include some of that necessary context and then move into framing things as the questions that you suggested?
Well, just as a short answer, I think they already agreed to yes to that the thrust of that introduction previously in this meeting, they said, yeah, it needs to be put up there. So that's been agreed to. Ken.
Yeah, Ginger is referring to what's on, I think, my page 7 and 8 when I'm looking at the latest version. And I quite agree. I think, you know, as I said earlier in the meeting, I think this is really well done in terms of pulling together the ideas that we've got. So this is beyond what we had talked about before. This is now the things which appear underneath the graphic, the Coffin Butte site life scenarios. That graphic, which is at the top of page 7 in my open version. So, I mean, I haven't read this closely, but as Ginger said, I mean, this is taken largely from what I had written, and I was trying to bring this to consensus. So that all, you know, I really support that. The thing that I wanted to just kind of point out here is that we've kind of done a jump. Sam, you've kind of taken us on a jump in that we were talking about events and factors with the basically what I call the array that had, arrows pointing this way and that. And there, we have two different variants on that particular thing. And Sam jumped us down to, the next section, which has to do with scenarios. So, I would like to just kind of bring I think the thing that we really want to resolve is back in the upper part when we're talking about the arrays, and when we're talking about the listing of scenarios, because we really haven't kind of finalized on that. But it seems like we're coming to a kind of consensus, which, for me, when I look at the chart, which is at the Coffin Butte site life scenarios chart that we have, that has been put in there, and that's the one that's supplied by Republic Services. That is what is trying to be communicated by the various arrays, is what are the things, and then which side of the ledger do they fall on. And again, people have questions about, when they see essentially what the baseline is, they have questions and they have viewpoints about which factors are going to pull which way. And I certainly think that the ones that shorten the site life are really the very important questions. But people also want to know what is the effect of actions that they actually have within their power. So, for example, pushing for increased recycling or factors like that. And so they want to see a scenario, they want to know which side of the ledger they're on, with, they want to see that those factors, I think, are indeed accounted for, that we know about them, or that they're in this list somewhere. So I think I've kind of lost my thread here, but mostly I want to just kind of bring us back to the, to talking about the events and factors, the arrays, and that scenario, because we haven't come, as far as I can tell, to kind of a consensus about what we're going to do next with that information.
Thank you. Can you tell us what page, and I'm asking Daniel to put that up, so I don't want to misunderstand what exactly you are saying about what specific array or chart that you think is helpful for us to look at.
Yeah, sure, fine. So on the new document, if you come down to when you come down to page 19, you'll see there's, the list items. So starting off with landfill contracts and business choices, and then there are little arrows kind of pointing this way or that way. And then it goes down a list, and the list that we're dealing with is the list that we put together during one of our past meetings. We just kind of identified these items, and I just tried to clean up that list and then characterize, kind of explain what we mean exactly by the items, etc.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure I'm focusing in. I'm trying to get sections pulled out that we have an emerging consensus on, so that they can be put in a tighter draft for which we can then, dot I's and cross T's. All right. So a couple comments. I'm just reading it here. So this gets, I'm not asking you to change screens, Daniel, but this was a similar comment from a process perspective to how to manage findings and recommendations. It was, if we're going to do it, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't or we shouldn't or the board doesn't want you to, look at these factors like this. We need to have a factor that says landfill contracts and business choices. That then we need to have Ken's version in the left-hand column, Daniel's version in the right-hand column, and then you, the subcommittee, mix and match to create the consensus treatment of landfill contracts and business choices. I think it would be improved if it said, we, the subcommittee, recommend that the expert, when looking at a modeling exercise, consider this question: to what extent, if any, at what ranges of impacts will landfill contracts and business choices impact the expected life of the landfill? So you ask a question, you tell them generally, what this looks like, and that's it. Any argument or position or a possibility, I believe, is a step too far. So I am not rejecting that kind of level of treatment. It's when we get to, and therefore the answer is X, even a range. It is not a modeling type exercise. And we are never going to get to yes on that, and nor should we, because we are not the experts on this topic. We can do a visioning. This is never designed to be a visioning exercise. It's the bridge to what's going to happen forward. And I think this sets up the bridge. But without seeing Daniel's version of this side by side, I can't figure out how close or far apart we are on each of these things. The way the conversations last meeting were miles apart. I don't know if that's true, because I haven't been able to look at them to see if there is dissonance. And I know this is just one example. Simple. So Daniel, let me ask you this. Looking at these two things here, landfill contracts, business choices, lifestyles, what have you, just on the stage as an example, how different or what issues do you see with this treatment that's on the screen?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So there's a couple things. I think functionally, just zooming out, I don't think there's actually significant differences. Well, I think there are significant differences, but I don't think they're so major as we've kind of highlighted in our last meeting. But I'll try to do my best to kind of talk about the changes that I made, because my work is very much based in all of this, and a lot of it is copy and pasted. So my goal was to just expand, if we're taking this imaginative route of talking about how this could impact landfill life, I was just trying to paint the full picture, essentially saying, instead of taking a narrow view of this will impact the landfill life this way, saying it could impact the landfill life this way, but it also very well could impact the landfill life this way. So you'll see kind of these added lines are things that I added to try to kind of paint the more complete picture. And so that's one factor. To Ken's point in his comments, a lot of those flip sides as they exist are addressed elsewhere in the document, mainly just because of how they're organized. It can organize it in terms of, here are the factors that will decrease in landfill life, here are the factors that will increase landfill life, and a lot of those are sort of duplicated or the flip side of each factor. One example is lifestyle changes versus reductions in waste generation. My approach was saying those are all lifestyle changes in terms of waste generation. If waste generation per capita increase, this is what it could do to demand and therefore landfill lifespan if the landfill accepted that waste. If waste generation decreases per capita, this is what could happen. So those functionally, I think those are the main differences. The other really key difference, and I think something that if we take this approach, that Ken's approach here, one thing that I think will improve it greatly is just laying out that each of these have the key assumptions that this will actually change the demand of materials going into landfill, because that's not actually spelled out except for this landfill contracts and business choices. But everything we're talking about demand here. So that's one key assumption that I think needs to be spelled out. The second one is that the landfill would then choose to either accept or not accept that waste, which, this whole approach assumes that the landfill doesn't have that agency, which is very much the case. So I think if we spell out those assumptions front and center and say all of these assume changes the demand, all of these assume that the landfill operator chooses to take that waste, I think it could really work. I think functionally, the organization, I think it's nicer for the readers to see one factor and see the flip sides of the coin all spelled out, as to not try to, so when they're reading through this document, it doesn't look like we know the answer here. We know how lifestyle changes are going to impact the landfill, because we don't. And then the only other piece that I've left out of my version that I think Ken did really well is when he's talking about the shortens landfill life, he'll express only as far as the baseline. And I think that context is helpful for the reader. If we're going to go as far as saying, if it were to shorten landfill life, it would go only as far as the baseline, or only as far as 1.1 million tons per year amount, whatever that is. I think Ken does that well, and it could improve whatever product comes out of this discussion. I'm sorry if I rambled on there, but those are the main differences that I noted.
So let me see if this process will help. Ken, your overarching principle is first to sort them by shorten or lengthen, and then you're taking these alphabetically, the landfill contracts and lifestyle. Is that the overarching organizational principle?
Yes.
Okay.
So when, like on the screen that we're looking at now, we are looking at that aspect which shortens landfill life. So we're not looking at the things that lengthen. That comes later. We're just looking at the shortened side.
Okay, so my instinct, which easily could be wrong, is another way to do it. I'm not saying it's better. I'm trying to see if it could be better from the new reader's perspective. Is we have a table. The left-hand column are all these factors in alphabetical order. The second column is how this factor could shorten lifespan. The next column over is how that same factor could lengthen lifespan. And then the fourth column is where you tee up the question for the SMMP expert and say, what is your best, what do you think is the best likelihood as to how it's going to play out? Because just right now, and again, I can't necessarily, this factor, well, this is what, in part, what's happening here by what appears to be your edit. who added this factor can also extend?
I did.
So that was not part of Ken's original.
No.
It's just in another place potentially later down, Ken. Is that what you're saying? Because you have them
Yes.
separated by short and long.
Yeah, exactly. The
Okay.
flip side is in the appropriate, the other column, if you will.
Okay. And maybe is that part of the challenge? It's not in the other column visually. It's in another, I'm making this up, 7 pages down, where the reader is going to have to know that, well, you need to read under landfill contracts, or let's use, it's easier to use lifestyle changes. Under lifestyle changes, here's how I would shorten it. But without Daniel's additional edit there, you have to go 5 pages down to see the converse of that. But if it was in a chart right there, the reader, it just jumps off the page. Here's the factor. Here's how it should shorten. Next column, here's how it can lighten. Expert, what do you think? That tees it up. Reactions, thoughts to that mechanical approach. Because then you can read all the columns. You can see all, then you then have at the bottom of that, the bottom row is really, if all of these, if the shortened statements are true, this is what it looks like. And the next column over is if all or some of the above are true, that's what that would look like. Now, which is more likely? Can reaction just to the style, format, presentation issue. Does
Sam,
that help or hurt?
Sam, speaking on behalf of Ian, Bill, and myself,
Yeah.
we support a approach that asks a question. We're not in favor of a table that says could do this, could do that, because then we're still trying to get an answer in there or insert an answer in there. We'd rather just leave it as, here's our question. What do you think? Because as you look at most of these things, I'm sorry. Let me end my phone call there. As you look at most of these things, like all the way through, it says it could do this, it could also do that. I mean, the bottom line is we don't know what it will do. And that's the point. So we're teeing it up, as you had said at the beginning, SMMP. We're acknowledging that all of these factors are here. I think we are comfortable saying that, but I am real hesitant to do anything that's beyond posed as a question.
Okay. I think you guys' position is clear, and I'm not, by having this narrow part of the conversation, which in my mind is just a structural conversation, doesn't mean that you as a subcommittee have been asked to say, are we doing it or not? It's simply, how can we get this document in a place that we have a chance of doing it if you decide you want to go this route? And it's clear Republic's position is you don't want to go this route. You want to ask the question and not tip the scale for the pro or the con. Ken, getting back to you then, I'm just literally trying to figure out a format that makes this easier to review so to see how close we are before I have to call the question, are we doing it or not? You're on mute, buddy.
Sorry, I thought I clicked that button.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah, exactly. I think the graphic that you're talking about is, eminently doable. We might want to just keep the format, like I said, that the other graphic has established, where there's kind of the thing in the middle, if you will, and positive, negative. that sort of view. But anyway, we can build on what kind of already exists and just flesh it out with these additional items. You know, so that can be done. The kind of the question is, should it be done? Because it seems to me to be somewhat of a, you know, laborious process, if you will, because, you know, a part of the difference between what is going on here. So when we're looking at the screen, you know, when I talk about landfill contracts and business choices, the reason that this is under shortened landfill life, you know, which basically is just saying this is the way that we hold to the baseline that Republic has, you know, when we're talking about landfill contracts and business choices, that is Republic, you know, maintaining their business. They've indicated that they would like to maintain high volume. This is how they do it. And so I'm just really defining that. So the problem with the table is that you have these, you know, necessarily in a table, you have a small word choice, you know, you have some little phrase, and then often those things, they can be interpreted different ways. And so I think to do this correctly, you point out, because the flip side of this is not, you know, Republic doing business. The flip side of this is other companies doing their business, you know, and in taking over part of the, you know, the waste shed that Republic currently controls, or kind of however that whole business give and take goes. So
just go ahead, please.
So anyway, that's the way that I kind of see that playing out. It just seems to me like, you know, it's
maybe this clarification.
I guess I'm sorry, I'm just fundamentally, well, first of all, I appreciate essentially some engagement with the actual material and looking to improve it, because that's not what's happened to this material up till now. So like adding the chart, that's, you know, that's a great idea. I like to see those new ideas coming in. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Maybe this will help. I am not suggesting a chart that has plus and minus. I think of a landscape document. Maybe it has to be on legal to get the, you know, the canvas wider. That actually says left-hand column, landfill contracts and business choices. Next column, it actually says, takes that paragraph, landfilling at, all the way down to etc., and copy and paste it in there. Then the next column over, again, assuming we're going to do this, go this route, actually says whatever the counter argument is. And then the final column is saying to the experts, which one, you know, what do you think? What's your best judgment and guidance? You're the ones that are the subject matter experts who can opine on this. That's what I'm suggesting, not just a naked up, down, sideways thing, but we're never going to be able, if we're going to try to reconcile these things and do more than ask the question, but prompt the answer, heaven forbid, actually answer it. Formatting wise, we have everything in the eye's vision sight line to understand the differences. We do not have that now, simply as a mechanical answer.
So Sam, I just want to say I'm comfortable with that table, and I think it will go a long way to really being able to kind of highlight how each of these do have a flip side, and maybe it's ways that in this version hasn't been imagined. Exactly. Like Ken mentioned earlier, the flip side of business choices and landfill contracts is the loss of that business, or rather successful competition, he points out. But that's not the only flip side, right? The other flip side is the operator choosing to extend their business longevity and accepting less waste over time. Like, is that likely? I don't know, but is it possible? Certainly. So I like the idea of being able to just highlight the full spectrum of what the possibility is in a document like that.
With equal treatment. Because anyone that's not been in these calls is not going to know where to find the flip side to whatever proposition you've put forward. So I am suggesting, because again, as I said in the memo, I want to drive us to as many common understandings as possible. Simply from a mechanical process perspective, we can't get there with the document in its current format, because no one can take however many 25 factors here and look for each factor in two different places and have a picture of what's going on. The reader needs to see, if at all, we're not there yet, because we could decide just to ask the question. So there's three things: asking the question, teeing up what we want the consultants to look at, and then there's answering it. Those are three possibilities. I'm clearly saying that the reason why this expert is being hired is to answer the question. Everyone agrees we're going to ask the question. So the decision point is, to what extent do we tee it up for the consultants and for the residents and board and all that stuff. So yes, it's tedious, Ken, to reorganize that, but that's why God invented a Daniel. Sorry, Daniel. Reactions, thoughts as to the game plan to get us to the next step forward. Chuck?
What I'm looking at is, I think we have consensus on what Ginger put in on page
5 and
50.
6.
Well, yes, what I'm referring to is, 5 or 6, or on page 15, more with the array that she agreed to. And the array has specific positive, negative, and neutrals on subject matter, the recession, the landfill, so forth like that, if you will. And within that parameters, then you can look at a principal law of economic supply and demand as it plays out, which Daniel was talking about. And that plays out whether there's acceptance of that demand. Okay, what I was looking at with Ken's, then, he fundamentally has an example of a recession, a landfill expansion, and that there we stay within those parameters initially that we have consensus on. So mechanically, the array is there. You can pull out of the array correlations, if you will. Does one positive outweigh all the negatives there? And that's just an exercise with the array being there that you can do later, but establish structure. So then if you want to define what those elements are of a recession or less waste per capita, that should evolve down later, which Ken was kind of putting together. Now, I don't know if you want to go outside the parameters of those one of the array that we tentatively agreed on for those topics to expand on.
So can you go to that array that Chuck is referring to? I want to make sure
Yeah,
What
what
is
I
this?
think what Chuck is pointing out, and rightly so, is that what is listed in the graphic on 15 does not exactly match up with what Ken and Daniel have later in their document. And so we would probably need to agree to either stick with what's in the graphic or modify the graphic to match some of the factors that Ken and Dan were considering in their scenario building as it relates to asking the question, just so we have consistency throughout the document. I think Chuck, is that where you were going with that? Am I reading that right?
Yes, so if whatever the reader comes to, they see those elements, and then what is that element? You're right. So there's readability, but there's structure to it.
So my only process point on this particular figure is it's not content oriented, because it is, yes, somewhere as an introduction to, even if we just ask questions, okay, there needs to be something that looks more graphically 30,000 foot level as to what we're trying to say to them, so that we don't bury the punchline. What I like about this, forget that I understand we don't have agreement as to where each of those factors goes under those three columns, and it's way simplified, but something that doesn't bury the lead. And I think Ginger's paragraphs that we talked about in the beginning, there is an emerging consensus that introduction may help unbury the lead and be a good entree or appetizer into the whole meal deal. All right. So I'm suggesting the next steps be that we clarify what our next steps are with a timeline and revision process. I think, unfortunately for you, Daniel, that is going to be driven by taking the emerging consensus thoughts that we've developed today and reorganizing this so that we really do not have all these competing versions, that the material is in one organizing place. And that's the format I suggested for the findings and recommendations, and just now for these factors. Then if we can get consensus on this new multi-word table, not just plus, minus, yes, no table, that it fairly represents that might move you to a different poll result than we otherwise have now, because it will show both sides. And then we will ultimately have to call the question: are we simply asking the question? Are we teeing up what we want the consultant to consider, or are we providing our own possibilities as to the answers? I think that process gets us the greatest chances of landing this plane. Reactions, positive and neutral, negative, or suggestions for improvement to that process plan. The silence is deafening here. So Brian agrees that approach makes sense.
I'm
And you have your
certainly happy to take it to the next step, to kind of see this in action. I think is going to be what's, going to let us know if this is working or not.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's going to work. I'm simply saying the status quo is not going to work. And so this is just an approach to do it. Paul, thoughts?
Just to be clear, Ginger, if I'm understanding correctly, Republic Services will not support the publication or presentation of this table as Sam is envisioning it. Is that correct? Because it does list more detail and sort of predicted impacts, if you will. not specific numbers, but up or down.
I will say at this point, we've been pretty clear since the beginning on the record of what we're comfortable with. That said, we are but one member of this subcommittee and our work is not done, and our overarching goal is to reach consensus wherever possible. So I'm willing to see what comes of this exercise and see if it's something that we can support. And I think like that's the most I can give right now, but I'm completely willing to take it to the next step and see if we can get there that way.
All right, thank you. That helps a lot. In that case, Sam, I think it's worth taking this step, and let's build the table and see if we can extract something meaningful out of it.
Chuck? Okay with this proposed process? Really next steps.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Mark?
Yes.
Okay. Ian?
Yeah, I'm with Ginger.
Okay. All right. So getting back to mechanics, Daniel, what does this look like? And we recognize this is kind of a Herculean reorganization effort.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So, I mean, I'm more than happy to take on the role of getting this table together, and I will do my best. But please, as you all have done, don't hold back if there's anything that's not quite representative with the table when I release it. So I just want to say I'll do my best. I did have a couple questions. I think we all are leaning towards Ginger's kind of introduction piece. So I just wanted to clarify for my next steps as well in the rest of this section 3. We're keeping the first scenario 1 and 2 image. And then the description kind of introduction that Ginger put together. And then are we asking to essentially remove the kind of other kind of introduction information, competing information leading into the events and factors that might impact site life? Is that the idea, that Ginger's piece would replace that? So that's question 1. And then question 2, I guess, is when I put this table together, my approach is largely going to be kind of copying the content from Ken's kind of events and factors piece, copying content from my events and factors piece as it doesn't like overwrite anything, and just try to fit them all into the table neatly. So I guess just want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with that approach, and if I'm incorrect about how to approach that first image and Ginger's introduction.
So I think the answer to that is yes. And again, we don't need at this point to attribute and change other people's work and all that stuff. I want to get this as clean as possible so we can focus on the substance more than the process piece. Ginger?
Going back to what Chuck pointed out at the beginning of this particular discussion, what is in the table on like the green Coffin Butte site life scenarios, I don't believe is representative of what is in Ken and Daniel's version. So
it's not, right.
From my perspective, are we scrapping the table? Is that the proposal? Because I didn't think that was what we had agreed to. Or like, are we going to expand what's in Ken and Daniel's proposal to address things like the global health issues or the recession or the things that are listed at the table and earlier in the section?
Okay, to me, that table for now is simply a placeholder with a big note that says we will talk about updating it. We'll talk about if we need it and how to update it after we see this more tabular view of the various issues.
Okay, I think the problem I have with that is that there are things on that table that you are now saying is a placeholder that we have previously agreed are impacts that impact the landfills or could potentially impact the landfill site life, and those are not reflected in what you're proposing to put in the new table.
How could that be? So what am I missing here? I mean, have you guys literally agreed to the table on page 15? I don't think you have. The table on 15 is the one that I think Chuck is talking about, the green, yellow, red table.
Yeah, no, we have not agreed to everything that's in there, but nor have we agreed to everything that is in Daniel and Ken's, up down.
Right.
And so my question is, if Daniel builds a table just from the up, down, and the arrows, that leaves out a whole bunch of stuff that's on the table that I think also ought to be considered. I think it would be remiss to not include things like a recession or things that are, like global health issues or a pandemic, things that we know have, like when we built that table, we built it from with this subcommittee's discussion, what has happened previously that we can draw conclusions from. So that was where those topics came from.
Okay, so then just very mechanically then, all Daniel needs to, quote unquote, all Daniel needs to do is in this new spreadsheet version of it, add a box for a recession, add a box for these other things so that they will be considered.
Okay, and I'm fine with that. It just didn't sound like we were doing that. So I wanted to make sure that
absolutely
was really clear.
Yeah, as long as, I want a complete list. So it was never an intent to exclude an item that's on this chart, nor the reverse. So it's Mark and then Ken.
Thanks, Sam. So yeah, I agree with what Ginger just said there. I think the intent was, or with what you just said, the intent is to pull that stuff that was on that table that Daniel just had up and make sure that's in the bigger table that we're now going to be working on. So that would be great. I would like to, and I'm sorry I'm not as familiar as I should be with where this document is right now, but we talked about leaving in the baseline graphic, I think we called it. I think if there's anything that we've learned through this process is the answer to the question of what is the end of life, or what is the capacity, what's the long-term capacity of the landfill is not a simple answer. So I just want to make sure that on top of that graphic, that it's somehow caveated, because I am concerned that policymakers will only read so far. They'll get to the point of saying, oh, there's 15 years left. That's the answer. And they won't read the rest of the stuff if it's buried deep into the report. So as we're building this, as we're trying to finalize and reach consensus, I hope that we have if you will, a sentence or two that caveats that baseline scenario or baseline scenarios, 1 million tons or 1.1 million tons.
And mechanically, Mark, I think the best way to do that is, yes, in the section of the report where it talks about it, but it should be an absolute blinking light key finding.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You just said should be an absolute key finding so that the point is not lost. Because I'm just so concerned about anyone outside of this room reading this and not getting the right impression that really truly captures what we're trying to say here. Ken, thanks for your patience. You're up.
Oh, no problem. I just wanted to reassure Ginger that it certainly was my intention putting together my list of factors to include all of the things that were on that list in that graphic. So if there's something missing, it's an oversight and not at all deliberate or whatever.
Chuck?
I was just trying to get my up thumb. Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you very much. I really think that we've taken a constructive path forward, and my optimism that I try to convey in the memo is now reinforced by your exploration of these issues. Go forth. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And Daniel, can you call me about couple other mechanical matters.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.